Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Focus B show. You might be wondering why you're hearing a male voice and not the voice of Katie. It's because this is episode 300. We're going to be celebrating a major milestone, episode 300. My name is Stoyan Yankov, a best selling author, a podcaster, a professional speaker, and I'll have the honor today to welcome Katie. Katie as a guest of the show so we can reflect on and celebrate this incredible milestone. Katie, congratulations! Wow, what a number! What a number! How are you feeling?
Amazing, Sayan. It's so great to have you as a host today. And I was actually getting quite moved as I was reviewing all the different people I'd interviewed and the journey I've been on for almost 5 years. So excited to be here to celebrate episode 300. It's amazing.
I love it. I love it. So tell me, what do you enjoy most about hosting this podcast?
I think it's twofold because I both have solo shows and interviews. And on the solo shows, I really love sharing something that's close to my mind at that moment, something that I'm particularly interested in, maybe a book I've read recently. So I feel that with the solo shows, I'm sharing and teaching a concept I've just learned, and it helps me to anchor it more deeply. And on the interviews, I mean, you know as well as I do, Soyan has also a fantastic podcast called Productivity Mastery, and the joy that we get from interviewing all the different experts in so many different fields. It's ongoing learning, connection, impact. It's absolutely wonderful.
I wonder how did it all started? Was there like a moment that a seed started growing in your mind, an inception? How did you decide to start this podcast?
It was a very fast decision. I remember it was some point in August, and it just occurred to me. I thought, I quite like the idea of hosting my own podcast. I think at the time I was listening to the Tim Ferriss show. I listened to quite a few episodes. I liked that content, I liked that dynamic. And I had the idea beginning mid August, and I started 1st of September. So it was very fast, totally unprepared. I didn't have a mic back then, I didn't have a good camera. It's just been constant improvements since the 1st of September 2020.
It's been a journey. It's been a journey. Can you maybe try and reflect on some of the key learnings? First of all, as a podcast host, what were some of the key learnings? And then afterward, we can move on and learn more about your key learnings from the guests of the podcast.
As a podcast host, I'd say that one of my learnings was to constantly raise the bar. So, not to settle. So, I settled for maybe a bit too long using Zoom, for instance, which is a great platform for other things. And then I started to explore, could I use StreamYard or Riverside or Restream? There was maybe higher quality video, for instance. And so I feel constantly upgrading, not just in terms of the tech, but in terms also of the type of interview, style of interviewing, the way you prepare the questions. So not becoming too complacent and settling. I think it can be quite easy to reach a stage where it feels quite comfortable. You know what you're doing. You ask roughly the same questions and then you settle there. But you can constantly upgrade the type of people you're interviewing, the type of questions you ask, the tech that you're using. And I feel that makes the journey more enjoyable. And also, you continuously grow, and the show also becomes higher quality. So, when I look back to the very first episodes, I definitely see a huge contrast. Even before this interview today, I was looking at some of my snippets, and even episode in the 90s, like 95, 97. I was like, wow, the quality of the video wasn't as good. I was still using Zoom, the audio, the camera, everything was lower. Even the way I spoke was lower quality. So I'd say it's a journey of continuous improvement.
Can you give us a bit of a behind the scenes look, just for people, I think listeners of the podcast, it would be interesting to hear how do you prepare to host a guest on the podcast? Like, what's the whole process? Imagine that you confirm the guest. What are the step by step? What is the process for you to be best prepared to host the episode?
I made it quite lean, so it's quite an easy process. So when they book, they get automatic reminders. I never do a pre-call beforehand. I know some podcast hosts do that. I like to prepare for that first conversation directly and save us time. So I never do a pre-call. And then I typically prepare before the interview. So anything between half an hour to 2 hours before. If they have a book, I'll read their book and I block that slot. And then I'm in that mindset. And then I absorb their whole world and read their website and their LinkedIn and go through different blog articles. And from there, I extrapolate 2, 3 core themes that could be the main guidance for the entire episode. And then I do free flow. So I like to make it quite lean, quite simple. When you reach to 300 episodes, you can't spend 50 hours per episode. But I do use the opportunity quite often to read the person's book. So that obviously takes a bit more time. Then I summarize the whole book. So I guess that part is quite time consuming. But because I love reading and I do that anyway, I see that as just a bonus.
Interesting. To me, I'm always looking for if the guest being a guest on other podcasts or they have an audio book, because that saves you time. You can listen, you can hear some stories. But interesting that you are more focused on reading their materials.
Yes, I am.
Beautiful, beautiful. What were some of the who are some of the guests that made the greatest impact, that really resonated with you and made you think and maybe rethink the way you see the world?
There was so many amazing guests, and what's more, as I was preparing and reviewing all the different people that I had the opportunity and privilege of speaking with, I realized that I learned so much. At the end of every single episode, I would always have one takeaway. I would always think, wow, that was really powerful. And I don't know, it must be synchronicity or the universe, but I was always in sync with a topic that I was struggling on at that moment. It would always be exactly what I needed to hear. I remember a lot of stories around resilience, and as you know, it is quite challenging to run your own business. So having constant reminders of resilience is quite helpful and nice and helps you to persevere. For instance, I remember interviewing Kate Strong, and she's a world champion both in cycling and running. And she told me a story of how when she began her career or a different point when she was a bit stuck, she would be cleaning toilets. And as she cleaned toilets, she felt quite calm and quite at ease. And from that place, she was able to slowly climb up, climb up, climb up, and then she became world champion. And also, I remember her telling me when I asked her, is success more strategy or psychology? And in this case, it wasn't even strategy because we're talking about physical success. So I was sort of saying, is it like our body and our strength? And she said it was 90% in our minds, like 90% the psychology, the mindset that helped you to get to the level of world champion. That really, really stuck with me. I mean, we already know Tony Robbins already said that success is 80% psychology, 20% mechanics. And she not only confirmed it, she said it was even 90%. And I remembered that ever since.
It's interesting how we tend to resonate the most with stories and examples. Like the first thing that came to your mind now was this story. This I wonder how do you decide who to invite to the podcast, and how do you manage to book such high profile guests?
How I decide is pretty intuitive. So typically, I will either read someone's book or hear someone on a podcast or read someone's post on LinkedIn and it will resonate with me. Then I'll check a bit more of their content and reach out. So it's a very fast process. Essentially, I just ask myself, would this be a person that I would love to talk with and learn from? And other people can learn from. So it's very fast and intuitive, and of course linked to my field. So I tend to ask people who are around high performance leadership, entrepreneurs, or spirituality. So one of these four pillars. And then I invite them. And when it comes to a high profile guest, for example, Jarek Robbins, Tony Robbins' son was on the podcast. We had an amazing conversation. I remember him saying that a lot of what we do is habitual, up to 40 to 60% is habit, and then reflecting a bit on how we can shift our habits to be less in autopilot. So, for example, in his case, I just reached out to him on LinkedIn, and typically I do that quite often. So I'll reach out once, and then 3, 4, 5, 6 months go by, then I'll do it again, then again. And in those moments with the podcast, I don't even track it on Excel, but I just intuitively think, oh, I'd like to have that person on the podcast. And then I check and I've already written to them 3 times. And I thought, oh, well, I'll ask again. I would typically forget. I think that's kind of healthy because if you remember all the times you get ghosted, ignored, or rejected, it can be quite hard. But me, I'm quite impulsive and I'll just reach out to them because I feel it'd be great to have them on the show. And then I'll forget for 6 months to a year. Oh, well, are you still up for it? Would you like to come? And because he hadn't answered, that wasn't a no. It just, and then I thought, okay, it's lost in the inbox. And then one day he wrote, yeah, sure, sounds good. I was like, great.
Was Jarek the person that you have to wait the most before he said yes, or who was somebody that you have to ask many times maybe, and finally they agreed?
There were quite a few people. One of them, she said yes immediately, but it took a really long time to get the booking. And she's called Beatrice Chestnut, and she's very well known in the Enneagram world. She's one of the top person in the whole Enneagram world. She's written a lot of books on it, and I love the Enneagram. I use it a lot, not in my work directly when coaching clients, but as a background to better understand people and myself. So I was really excited to get her on the podcast. And it took a long time for us to book it because she was constantly traveling, constantly at seminars. I think it took us almost a year to agree on a date, but I was very excited to have her on the show.
Beautiful. And how has the podcast changed you as a person? Like, can you see, first of all, how often do you do it these days? And can you see you growing as a leader, as a professional, because of having these frequent conversations?
In many ways, I feel that it makes you more confident because you're having interactions with people that would normally be out of your peer group. I remember the first time I interviewed Jerry Colonna. He's the author of Reboot, a very famous leadership coach in his space. And I was very nervous. This was probably my first high profile guest. Maybe I was 50 or 60 episodes in. And then I realized they're just human, but also you show up differently when you know that you're interviewing someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of space in their calendar. They're choosing to prioritize you out of kindness, out of curiosity, for the fun. They don't really need to be on your podcast. And then you feel very honored and privileged to be able to talk with them. So you show up differently. And each time I've had guests in general, all the people I talk to are fantastic. Stoyan was on the podcast. You were one of the first episodes. Every time I feel I show up differently. And it also makes you very humble because obviously you talk with people who have amazing achievements, both in terms of the legacy and impact. Ed Hess, for instance, that I interviewed, has written, I can't remember how many books, over 10 or 15 books, a lot of books. And I feel more humble when I interview these people. So it makes you at the same time more confident because you need to show up in a certain way, but also more humble because you learn so much from all the different guests.
You know what, I'm curious, for the people who maybe just tune in right now for the first time, they listen to this episode right now, could you explain what's your style of interviewing? Right, you have the, on the one side you have this Joe Rogan style, very kind of a casual conversation about everything, and then you have some podcasters that's a super strict following a specific topic. What is your style, Katie? What should people expect if they start listening to the podcast?
I would actually really love to ask the audience to write what my style is. I feel it's quite short and sweet because I tend to do half an hour episodes, and my solo shows are maybe even 10 to 20 minutes. And I go straight to the topic. So I typically don't ask people about their background stories, mostly because they maybe covered it in other podcasts. Maybe I've read about it. Sometimes it shows up, but mostly I go straight for a topic. So when you think about productivity, what is one of the tools you use most? Or when you started your spiritual journey, what was something that made the biggest difference? Or what are some false ideas around this topic? I go straight for a certain topic, and then it's quite free flow. Like I said in the preparation, I have an idea of the theme. I might have 2, 3 questions prepared, and then I follow my intuition. So I'd say it's quite condensed, quite fast on a certain topic, maybe more tools mindset oriented than long stories. Of course, there's some storytelling, but I'd say I'm probably not a podcast where that's the main focus. That's what comes to mind when I think about my style. And also, I know earlier you asked about the different things that I learned from people I interviewed. And one of them I remember was this short clip that I had by Simon Alexander Ong, who's also a coach who went to the same coaching school as I did in London. And I remember that I had this clip by Simon who says, "Your words don't tell me what your priorities are, your actions do." And I had this as a motto in my mind for so long. I would wake up sometimes and think about it, or during the days I was working, I would think, words don't tell me what priorities are, actions do. What actions are you taking that illustrate your priorities, and what actions are you not taking that also show that maybe that isn't a priority for you? So there's so many little nuggets here and there, and that I could say hundreds of them that would be in the background and that I would remember throughout the day or throughout the week or years later, because they make an impact. They really shift the way you think and the way you feel about things.
First of all, in your style, I think people can see your style even in this interview. You're straight to the point, condensed, things are simplified. Let's get to the point, right? So that's your style. I know you're like chick, 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 right? On the nuggets piece, I actually feel like it's gonna be a great idea since it's episode 300. If you can share a few more of those nuggets that really stuck with you and made you think. So maybe we can reflect on some of those most important nuggets.
Absolutely. Another one was Giovanni Dienstmann. And Giovanni Dienstmann, he's the author of Mindful Self Discipline. And I was so happy to have him on the show. I've been listening to his content quite a lot on Insight Timer. And after that, we collaborated together, which was amazing. The podcast can open so many doors in so many unexpected ways. And I remember him talking about meditation, not just being peace, but meditation also being power. And he explained that when you meditated and you were calm and you had greater emotional intelligence and you were better able to manage your stress, it gave you the power to be very focused. It gave you the power to have discipline in what you needed to do. It gave you the power to choose your response and not just be on autopilot. And that was really quite magical, because he explained that we often have this view of meditation being a bit passive, just like a piece, accept everything, be a bit passive. And he said, actually, it can be the total opposite. It can be a tool for your own growth and your own way of responding to life, which can give you an extra asset in life and can give you extra power. So that was one nugget that really impacted me. And another beautiful episode, I interviewed my grandmother, Joan Chaplin, when she was 99 years old. She's now still alive, 102 years old by the time of this recording. And when I interviewed her when she was 99, she said that what helped her to lead a long, healthy life was always look on the bright side of life. These were literally her first words as we started the interview. There's no point in dwelling on the negative. Always look on the bright side of life. And we're talking about someone who went through World War II, someone who lost her husband. There's a lot of things that happened in her life, and she still chose to have this open, optimistic perspective. So that was a beautiful nugget that I often reflect on. And I
Powerful.
also remember talking with Aluba Phoenix, who's a coach who worked at Google back then, and he spoke about the dangers of flow. So I was always like, oh, being in flow is amazing, it's amazing. But he said it could be very addictive and it can lead people to take more and more risks. If you think of things like climbers, and that was something I'd never considered, that flow could have a dark side or a negative side. So that was a total shift of perspective. And there's so many more. Like I'm thinking also now of Boo, who's actually Christian Bukowski, but known as Boo. And he was a fighter pilot and he became a coach. And then Olafemi Xavier was military and he became coach. And both had this journey of coming from this very highly stressful, high pressured environment to then becoming a coach and transforming people's lives. It was so beautiful to hear their learnings from that past environment and how they can apply this to the coaching world, but also maybe with a little twist, slightly differently. And these transitions, especially because I made my own transition going from being an engineer working at sea to starting my own business as a coach, I feel it's so interesting to hear other people going through quite radical journeys and transformations.
I feel like that's what makes the podcast interesting. Because imagine you had 300 episodes with 300 productivity consultants with the same background. It's probably going to be repeating the same thing, but when you can learn productivity and leadership from people with these very interesting backgrounds, fighter jet pilot, your grandmother who's turning 102, this is impressive. who are some other? Can you maybe share some other very interesting profiles, maybe of people who are practicing their profession, or people who made a turnaround and they were in a specific area and then they changed?
I think a lot of people went through some quite radical changes and transitions. So those two that came to my mind were Boo and Olefemi, that came from a more military and fighter pilot perspective to then being a coach. Right now, I can't think of anyone particular, but I think a lot of them had started with something totally different. They were maybe working, well, for example, Simon Alexander Ong that I mentioned earlier with your actions show your priorities. I know he was working in a more corporate background, and I think in finance, if I'm correct, yes, I think it was in finance and highly pressured, and that's not what he wanted to do. And then he changed and started his own business as a coach. Many people were started doing something totally different. And I mean, you, Stoyan, you started in film, and then you went on to do coaching and speaking. It's so interesting. It also shows that we don't need to just follow one path, and we can have many paths in our life and follow what is most in tune with us.
And now, after 300 episodes, what are the themes, the topics that you're still curious to explore and dive deep into?
I feel all the topics you can always go one layer deeper. I think I'm most passionate about entrepreneurship and resilience, how people grow companies and grow businesses and activities and still have this inner resilience and perseverance. How they do it, both from maybe a strategic perspective, but also from a psychology perspective, and also spirituality, how to be on that deeper level of connection and find greater inner peace and impact to other people. I think those are topics that I'm very interested in. High performance is always fascinating. People who are world champion or who are able to overcome physical discomfort or mental discomfort to such an extent that they get high levels of performance, but without burning out and sacrificing their own well-being. I also think it's interesting to look at this from a female perspective because they have different bodies and different ways of functioning. So it's interesting to see how do they manage to be a top performer, whether it's in the business world or in sports and athletics, without damaging their mental health or their body. I'm only interested in high, healthy performance. So I like to see someone that has a holistic view and who is happy and fulfilled in different areas in their life and getting great results. I'm not particularly interested in people who have achieved amazing things but aren't happy in their personal life. That has no interest for me. I'm interested in people who can push the boundaries of what they thought was possible for them, but at the same time stay grounded, not burn out, not sacrifice their relationship and their health. Because I think this is what we all strive for. We want to achieve something great, whether it's in our business or in a hobby or in a career. We want to achieve something great and be fulfilled within that work. I think it leads to a lot of fulfillment when we're able to strive for something bigger than ourselves. But at the same time, we also want to be healthy and fit and have happy relationships. So I'm interested in people who've overcome this and who've achieved these different things and see what their journey looks like.
And for the next 300 episodes, are there any specific names of people or profiles of people that you want to bring in and feature in the podcast?
I have a list of hundreds of people, lots of people. I've read their books. I've written to Eckhart Tolle, for example, about 5, 6 times. They always say no, but that's okay. I'll just continue to write every 6 months or year. Michael Singer, who's the author of The Untethered Soul, absolutely love his work. I haven't reached out to him yet. I will though. And Mo Gaudat, also love his work. Reach out to him once. But I also know we need to reach out for the bigger guests that have more visibility. We need to reach out at least 3 to 10 times before getting a clear no or yes. So many people, each time I read a book that's interesting, I think, oh, I'd love to have this person on my podcast. I'm reading at the moment Chatter by Ethan Cross. I think that's quite interesting. So I'll probably check out his profile. It's just a constant in the background when I listen to someone on a podcast, read a book, hear something. All these people are interesting. So why not talk to them?
And by the way, now is the time to turn back to you guys, the audience, the listeners. If you ever enjoyed an episode from the Focus B, make sure to go and subscribe Subscribe on your favorite platform, Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube. You can find it anywhere. Subscribe, give 5-star review. You have no idea how much it helps Katie to grow the show, to bring all these amazing people. The more the subscribers, the more the ratings, the bigger the impact, and the bigger the chance for her to be able to convince all these cool people to come to the show. So please take a minute and make sure to subscribe and give a 5-star rating.
Absolutely.
Talking about the name of the show, I don't think I ever asked you where is that coming from. Are you the Focus Bee? Are we the Focus Bees? Like, where did that name come from?
Yeah, so the Focus Bee show, the Focus Bee is the company that came from the fact that I want to encourage and support people worldwide to go from being busy bees to focus bees. Because I believe that just being busy and scattered all the time doesn't lead to fulfillment or productivity or joy. It leads to stress and overwhelm and burnout. But instead, if we're all able to be focused bees, we're then able to achieve what we want in our life, and not just achieve, but find that inner peace, that inner joy that we want. And it's just better. It helps us to lead a more intentional life.
I love it. That's a great explanation. That's a great explanation. So tell me, why do you keep investing time, resources, and being passionate about growing the show?
I think because, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a journey of constant improvement. So I feel that there's always more to learn, both in terms of the actual production of the podcast, but more importantly about different guests. And there's just so many amazing people. Every time I've thought, even for a split second, maybe I could pause it or maybe I could stop. I think, why? Why? It's just so much fun. It's so great to interview all these amazing people, learn from them, connect with people all over. And once you have some form of visibility or authority in the podcast field, then you're able to bring on bigger guests, which, yes, the reviews really help a lot. So, guys, if you're listening, highly appreciate any review, 5-star review, 2, 3 comments, whether it's on the YouTube or Apple Podcast, Spotify would be amazing. And I feel that it's just such a privilege to be able to talk to these people that otherwise lead quite busy, quite intense lives and work. So it's so nice to be able to ask them things. It's like free mentorship for half an hour to an hour. So, wow, so nice.
Beautiful, Katie. Before I ask you the final question, I just want to ask you: was there a funny story or some technical struggle, anything that you can share, some kind of a, behind the scenes hiccups?
Oh wow, it's so many, so many. Seriously, I just have flashes through my mind. Times where maybe the software didn't work for either of us. We ended up changing platforms 2, 3, 4 times, or their computer was crashing, or sometimes the dog interrupts and barks, or there's always little things. But I think the more you do this and the more you get used to the tech not working and finding a way, an alternative. I've never had to reschedule the podcast because of it. Sometimes people canceled at the very last minute. That only happened 2, 3 times. It was very rare because they had an accident or something. But mostly it worked pretty smoothly. I think out of 300 episodes, it was quite a nice journey. There weren't that many hiccups, though there's always some, right?
I will do the same for the next 300 episodes and forward. What is the vision? What's next for the podcast?
Continuing on this field, constantly improving and innovating, and being sure that I interview people that have a lot to share, a lot to give in their field around high performance, around entrepreneurship, spirituality, maybe going a little deeper down the spiritual route. That's why I also mentioned Eckhart Tolle and Michael Singer. And so continuously exploring the field around spirituality, around high performance, entrepreneurship. There's just so much to learn, so much to uncover. It's very exciting. I'm very excited for the next 300 episodes. Then I'll bring you on for episode 600 again, Stoyan.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, for being the guest today. Congratulations once again for 300 episodes. For everybody listening, thank you for being with us. And once again, make sure to go to Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or any other major podcast platform. Subscribe, give 5 stars, the Focus Bee. And it's been a pleasure being here, Stoyan Yankov. Make sure to connect with me as well. And enjoy listening to the Focus Bee.
Thank you so much, Stoyan. You amazing host. Yes, check in the Focus B show, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And thank you so much for being the host, Stoyan. It's been amazing to celebrate 300 episodes with you.
My pleasure.